Gotta say hello. My name is Corey Schaus. I know most of you. I'm the director of the Latino Latin American Studies program. I want to start with a land acknowledgement and then some comments to introduce our fantastic guests tonight. Both the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University occupy the original homelands of the Dakota and Anishinaabe peoples. We honor, respect, and acknowledge the indigenous peoples forcibly removed from this territory whose connection remains today. Yeah, there's a theater event next door. St. Benedict's Monastery and St. John's Abbey previously operated boarding schools for Native children. Now students, faculty, and staff are working to repair relationships with our Native Nation neighbors. I want to welcome you to the final event in our series on parades and manifestations of public identity in Latinx communities. We began this event series back in February with a talk by the organizer of the West Side Cinco de Mayo parade. We continued off campus where a group of my fantastic LLAS students presented a mural that they designed and painted as part of an exhibit for International Women's Day in Minneapolis. And tonight we conclude the series with a talk on the Puerto Rican Day Parade, Identity and Fashion in New York City. In one form or another, the common thread of these presentations is a series of questions, right? There are three different events. You got a parade, a street festival, and a studio open house, but they all ask simple yet politically fraught questions. Who are we and who are they in society? What are the limits of nationality, of citizenship, and of belonging? Are these legal or cultural concepts? And in today's America, in the present moment, what does belonging mean? Does it require a type of assimilation that surrenders our differences and relinquishes our difference to the past as a form of heritage? Or does belonging mean an elbows out claiming of space and demanding of uniqueness and a seat at the American table? Okay, questions that are super poignant today, given I don't need to talk about the news, but it's all out there, scratch the surface. Tonight's speakers are Professor José Blanco and Raúl Vázquez López, and they will address some of these questions and more in the context of the most important Latinx celebration in the United States, the Puerto Rican Day Parade in New York City. This event bills itself as the largest demonstration of cultural pride in the nation. It was inaugurated in 1958 and celebrates the culture and contributions of the 3.2 million inhabitants of Puerto Rico and the roughly 3 million of Puerto Ricans living on the continental mainland. Tell you a little bit about our guests, and then I will pass the floor to them. José Blanco is an associate professor of history and art in the department, He's an associate professor in the history of art department at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York. Most recently, he edited the 5th edition of The Meanings of Dress for Fairchild books and co-authored Fashion, Dress, and Postmodernism for Bloomsbury. Raúl Vázquez López is a veteran of the editing and publishing industry, most recently working for Bloomsbury Publishing as adoptions and marketing manager for the United States and Canada. He has also published extensively on Puerto Rican dress and fashion. They have co-authored a book that will be out in June, okay, and it's titled Dress, Fashion, and National Identity in Puerto Rico, Taínos and Beauty Queens, and that will be out in print in June. So please join me in giving our guests a warm St. Ben, St. John's welcome.
All right. Is it on? Okay. You can hear me? Yes? All right. Well, thank you. We're really albeit the music next door, and we're both theater people, so maybe we'll start.
It's very New York, New Jersey.
Yes, so maybe we'll do this like. Should we do singing and dancing instead? Or like, we'll see. But we're very honored, and thank you, Corey, and the department for having us over. We've been here since Saturday and have been staying in the Abbey Guest House in St. John, and we've had a great time. Really, really love it.
It's been quite special. So thank you for the warm welcome.
So we are going to talk for about 40 minutes, something like that, and we are going to sometimes read and sometimes just talk to you. When you hear us read, we're going to be reading sections from the epilogue or the conclusion chapter from our upcoming book. So if you see us switch gears, that's it. And I don't know if I have anything else, any other...
No, I just want to promise you that at some point we're gonna skip slides by mistake, and you'll see us scramble through it. But
Yeah,
hopefully you'll enjoy that.
We'll do.
It's a promise.
Yeah, we'll do our best to keep you entertained, even if we make a mistake. So the title of our talk is The National Puerto Rican Day Parade, Fashion, Identity, and Decoloniality on La Quinta Avenida. And I want to make sure that everybody understands that although Raúl's training was in literature, Caribbean literature, and my training was in theater, we are fashion scholars, so we are talking about fashion. We're looking at this parade specifically talking about fashion. So we'll go ahead and start.
All right. There you go. So it was only about 73 degrees Fahrenheit on June 8th, 2024, far from the horrid heat waves yet to come, when we both attended the National Puerto Rican Day Parade for the first time ever. We had moved to New York City. Oh, that's you.
Oh, yes.
See?
First mistake. We had moved to New York City only a week before, and although we were beyond tired and still had boxes upon boxes to unpack, we knew we could not miss the parade. We analyzed the parade in the epilogue of our upcoming book, which we said is called Dress, Fashion, and National Identity in Puerto Rico, Taino to Beauty Queens. And what we do there is we explore Puerto Rican dress, and we'll tell you in a moment what we mean by dress, Puerto Rican dress and fashion as material culture.
Yeah, so what we do, we pay particular, close attention to the role personal adornment plays in shaping culture and social relations in Puerto Rico, the last Spanish-speaking colony in the world.
And up to that point, go back to that. See?
Sí.
Okay, we'll go back to that one. Up to this point, we had only been able to analyze the parade by looking at photos and videos. Even though we were writing about the parade, we had never been to the parade. So you understand that as we were finishing our book, it was very, very important for us that we were able to finally attend the parade.
Yeah. So let me give you a little bit of context on Puerto Rico, particularly through this obscenely abridged timeline of the history. So it was, the first encounter happened in 1898 when Columbus first 1498, a young nation, first arrived to what was called then Borinquen by the Taínos. And then in 1898, the United States wins the Spanish-American War, and at that point, Spain cedes Puerto Rico, amongst other places, to the U.S. Several years later, until 1917, Puerto Ricans get U.S. citizenship. There's a lot of background for that, but we're going to omit it for the purposes of this presentation. And 1948, we get the first elected governor. Like every governor before that was appointed either by Spain or then by the United States. And in 1952 is when we first get our constitution. That's when Puerto Rico becomes the Estado Libre Asociado de Puerto Rico. For geographical context, that red square represents where Puerto Rico is, right next to the Dominican Republic. And for another look, this is the archipelago. So Puerto Rico is comprised of several islands. It's not just one island. We have the main island there, and then Culebras and Vieques to the right over there. The red stars, identify places that we're going to reference throughout the talk. Atillo has a Christmas festival that we discussed, San Juan, the capital, then Loíza will have a very important part throughout the discussion, and Ponce in the south.
And we had told you about how the title of our book was Dress, Fashion, and National Identity in Puerto Rico. So we want to.
Yes, so using both dress and fashion in the same sentence can get some fashion scholars quite anxious. So to clarify, when we talk about dress, we follow the anthropological definition to describe any type of modification and supplementation to the way a person looks. And that includes tattoos, that includes your posture, that includes hair, makeup, perfume, you name it. So the idea is that we can pack our body with meaning.
And this is confusing because a lot of people think that when we study fashion, we are only studying clothes, but we also study what we call dress, which includes anything that you do to your body, as Raúl was saying. But if we look specifically at the concept of fashion, then by that we mean whatever is the prevailing style in which people dress at a given time or period or both. And of course, fashion is also a business. It's part of a capitalist industrial system. And fashion can also be an artistic creation. And often fashion is both a business and art happening at the same time.
And of course, we also use the term costume. And it's also a problematic term that usually denotes the idea of a form of dressing that is different from every day. So for example, something that you would wear for a festival or a carnival or anything for your traditional dances, etc. So it's also problematic because it romanticizes the past in ways that may not be realistic.
So we use all three. We use dress, fashion, and costume in our book. And we actually wanted to call our book Dress, Fashion, and Costume in Puerto Rico, but the publisher said it was too long of a title, and I'm still not super happy that we don't have the costume word in there, but
Yeah, we still got a long title anyway, so.
So now, with that intermission, we'll have a few intermissions, but now back to the parade. The parade to us was central in demonstrating our point of view that there is no analysis of Puerto Rican culture that can exclude the diaspora, the people that have moved from Puerto Rico and live in other parts of the world, in this case, the U.S. So for us, Puerto Rico is what we call a transnation, a country that cannot exist contained by the geography of just the island or just the archipelago.
So, simply put, there is no Puerto Rico without its diaspora, and there is no Puerto Rican national identity without the diaspora. So the movement of material culture in the hands of the diaspora implies that dress practices and costume traditions are not just relocated to the United States with the diaspora, but also modified by the diaspora to adapt to their new identity as minoritized systems. Citizens, sorry. Yeah.
So, and then in turn, what happens with that is that material culture that is created by the diaspora, the people that live here in the U.S., then goes eventually back to Puerto Rico, and then it impacts the way Puerto Ricans think about themselves and the way Puerto Ricans think about their national identity. So the diaspora has an impact even in the people that have never lived away from the island.
Yeah. So with all that background, you can see how Puerto Rico, Puerto Rico's status as a colony of the United States really presents a special opportunity for us to study national identity and nation formation through dress, costume, and fashion. So all very central elements to visual culture.
And so we wanted to tell you a little bit about how this started for us. This started for us about 10 years ago. I was
With a parade.
with a parade, spending Christmas in Raúl's house in Arecibo, Puerto Rico. Remember, that was on the map, one of the stars. And then he very casually told me, "Oh, there's this parade in the town next to me, and they wear this mascaras and these costumes." And I said to him, "Well, we should research that. We should," he said it very casually, "we should definitely research that." So decades, this was 10 years ago, so decades of research and many trips and several published essays led to the publication of our upcoming book.
So, in the meantime, we lived in like 3 different states. Four different states, yeah, that's right. Got married and, et cetera, et cetera. So
we found actually that researching Puerto Rican fashion and dress together was not just fulfilling, but it was actually a thrilling project. And we spent a lot of time at home having lunch and dinner and breakfast talking about our research and talking about our book. But now we want to get back
All right,
to the parade.
back to the parade. So, as Corey actually mentioned earlier, it's one of the Puerto Rican Day Parade is actually one of the oldest celebrations of Latin American diaspora in the United States. It is also considered the largest festival of its kind in the country. You know, that scale we knew in theory, but we finally got to experience it last year in 2024. Coincidentally,
Oh, yes. So the parade actually started, as Corey said, in 1958, and the first parade was on April 13, 1958. So yesterday was the anniversary of, the first ever Puerto Rican Day Parade. And it was a celebration for the New Yorican community. And of course, New Yoricans are Puerto Ricans that live, and many have actually been born in New York City, where the largest community of Puerto Ricans is. So this event is particularly interesting because it constitutes a festive gathering of an ethnic group, the Puerto Rican ethnic group, who is actually not really an immigrant group because they're actually U.S. Citizens from birth. And then so this puts it in stark contrast with other type of ethnic groups, ethnic parades. Like if you think about St. Patrick's Day, so it is a festival, a parade by people that were descendants of immigrants, but they are tied by a country that actually exists. Puerto Rico as a country doesn't exist, right? It's part of the U.S. So that's what this parade is very different.
yeah. So as we said, the parade shows how a form of national identity is shared between those that live in Puerto Rico and those that are on the diaspora. So a lot of the people from Puerto Rico actually do travel to witness the parade or to participate in the parade. In fact, we saw a lot of celebrities that are actually celebrities in Puerto Rico being part of the parade.
So these are all the photos, except the historic ones, of course, are from our experience at the parade last year. So you will talk a little bit about some of the things that you're seeing, but we wanted to play those two videos. So now another break to tell you a little bit about the theory that illuminates our book. So this is a little bit of what we cover in the introduction of our book.
Yes, so, buckle up. All right, so as we mentioned several times, Puerto Rico is a colony, so that is a big part of the discussion, right? There's no explanation of a Puerto Rico without discussing that. But what that means for us is that then Puerto Rico lives in a permanent state of hybridity. So these are some of the conversations, some of the interactions that happen. Puerto Rico exists in a colonial reality, but at the same time exists as an imagined nation. Puerto Rico is an archipelago in the Caribbean, but it is also a diaspora. And Puerto Rico also lives within the mythology of las tres razas, which we'll discuss in a little moment.
So a little bit about what we're talking about, the idea of the colonial reality imagination. Again, it's a place that has an identity as a country. It's a place that has an identity as a nation. But again, it's not an actual country. It's a colony of the United States. And so because of that, Laura Briggs wrote a book about Puerto Rico, and she calls it the most important place in the world, particularly because Puerto Rico is one of the only places in the world that has this dual state, right? Again, as a nation and as a colony of a superpower like the U.S. So she talks about how that continuous political and economical entanglement of Puerto Rico as a colony of the United States is incredibly interesting, and then makes Puerto Rico an ideal place to research. And then Sandra Ruiz, who is a Puerto Rican researcher, sees Puerto Rico as the perfect site to detangle the threats of modern globalization and the incessant desires of colonization. Remember that quote? Because when we talk to you about theory again, I'm going to come back to that quote and talk a little bit about that. And then Raúl has mentioned, of course, the idea of the diaspora, and the emphasis in our book is on both the island and the diaspora. Maybe you can tell them about the data here.
Oh, yes. So, these are some shocking and interesting numbers, but Puerto Rico is a small place, 100 miles by 25. So the population, last check, was 3.2 million people living on the island. However, as you can see, the diaspora living in the United States is 5.9 million. So there are more Puerto Ricans living in the U.S., in the continental U.S., than there are Puerto Ricans living in Puerto Rico. And this doesn't even count the Puerto Ricans that live elsewhere in the world.
And anywhere in the world. So a lot more Puerto Ricans live outside Puerto Rico than in Puerto Rico. And then so we use that and take the idea of Benedict Anderson, who's a writer that talked about the idea that every nation is kind of like an imagined community, that we believe these nations exist, but they don't really exist. They're like kind of like loosely tied together. And we think that Puerto Rico is one of the clearest examples of that, of a nation that is in a kind of like imagined. And so in our book, we talk about, we use dress and fashion to analyze how that identity is seen both in the island and the diaspora.
So continuing with this idea of hybridity and imagination, we have las tres razas. And we're going to see these throughout, playing in different themes. So this emblem here is the official symbol of the Instituto de Cultura Puertorriqueña, which was established like soon after we got the Constitution in 1955. So if you remember, the Constitution was in 1952. So this is the official wing of the government that it is tasked with preserving and promoting Puerto Rican culture. Right? And one of the things that you are taught as you grow up is that every Puerto Rican is comprised of the three races. We have the Taíno, the native, right here on the far left, the Taíno brings, corn and some, cultural elements. Then in the middle, we have the Spaniard conquistadors that brings law and knowledge and faith and religion, right? And then to the right, we have the African man that brought, sugar cane and labor and a lot of
enslaved labor.
Yeah, and then some cultural components as well. So we're always led to think of these three as equal parts of the Puerto Rican experience.
So now, again, I will say again, back to the parade. So on that Sunday in June last year, Puerto Rican flags were abundant, and the flags colors, the red and white from the star and stripes and the blue from the isosceles triangle on the left side of the flag, were part of the clothing and accessories worn by almost everyone who was watching the event. Not us, because we were still unpacking and we couldn't find our clothes. And the five-pointed star, that was his part and I read it. Sorry, cabeza de muñeco. The five-pointed white star in the triangle was also a central motif in clothing. And people that were watching the parade had flags of the images of the flag and Puerto Rican maps and other symbols that were referencing Puerto Rican culture.
So as one would expect, some of the imagery seen in T-shirts included coquí frogs, Jíbaro pava hats, and cockfighting, well-known buildings and monuments and images of famous individuals like baseball legend and philanthropist Roberto Clemente and salsa singer Héctor Lavoe. And on this picture, we have a manifestation of the coquí frog, which looks actually a little bit like this and is like really, really teeny tiny. Is perhaps the most important national symbol of Puerto Ricanness. But this coquí here, it also wears the pava hat, which is the straw hat connected or associated with the peasants. Is super muscular, and if you look at it, it gives you an idea of a boxer, which is a very important sport in Puerto Rico as well. So three things combined into this super jacked up coquí. So.
Now it's time for singing. So we were very interested, of course, on what people that were watching the parade were wearing, but we were particularly interested in what people that were actually walking on the parade, what they were wearing. So this is, for example, a vejigante, and it was part of a group, but we only could catch one of them. And notice that he's wearing a mask. This is a mask of African origin, and there's 2 festivals in Puerto Rico that use the vejigante mask. So we were very happy to see part of our research walking down the Quinta Avenida.
Now, several groups of women and children with musical accompaniment or not, wearing bomba costumes like the ones we see here, which are voluminous skirts, sometimes matched with elaborate tops, and sometimes simply worn with t-shirts identifying their organization. Bomba, for the uninitiated, is a music and dance style with deep African roots that emerged in the middle of the 18th century. Originally, women wore underskirts or enaguas given to them by the hacendados, which then they painstakingly decorated with jumbi beads and glass shards.
So maybe here we can play this video so that you can see and hear a little bit of bomba. So there's no question that this is of African origin, of course.
Yeah. So along with bomba dancers, there were also people walking along and riding on floats wearing the pava hats that we saw earlier, which is the symbol of the jibaro or the peasant. Some were holding sugar cane, a reference to the essential crop in the history of the island. One person wore a large muscular costume that you saw, the coquille frog, and combining those 2 essential elements. So, everything, all the tres razas manifested here in just multiple examples.
There were groups of children that were dressed in what is traditionally considered the national costume. There were women dressed as in the time of Spanish colony and wearing using fans that were used during a Spanish colonial time. There were people wearing what is basically carnival costumes from the Caribbean or from Brazil and so on. There were people dressed as cabezudos, which are like big puppets made with papier-mâché heads, and people usually walking in stills. There were people dancing bomba and plena, as we saw. So again, all of our research was there.
Yeah. So many children and adults dressed as, what spectators might perceive to have been indigenous dress or use apparel with Taino symbols. Also, we saw those. And some people painted their faces with stripes and motifs, stereotypically assumed to be indigenous. I will see some pictures of that in a moment. But many people were also participating with elements not directly related to Puerto Rican national identity, such as clowns, someone dressed, like you see here, in Egyptian garb, and a couple of cosplay Mandalorians with uniform featuring the Puerto Rican flag and colors, with one of them carrying a Grogu doll from the TV show. So.
And also, I don't know if you noticed this before, but in her Mandalorian costume, she has a symbol of the Taino symbol for the coquille, for the frog that Raúl was talking about. So notice how the indigenous influence makes it even to the Mandalorian costume. So now that you've seen some of the things that we saw in the parade, we want to tell you just a little bit about some of the chapters in our book in which we cover this.
Yeah, so Bomba and Plena, we already saw a little bit about Bomba there. These are some costumes, original costumes that were on display in an exhibit in Chicago. But, if you didn't know much about Puerto Rico, you at least likely knew that music is one of the biggest cultural productions of Puerto Rico. So you've heard of Bad Bunny, for example, you've heard of Jennifer Lopez, and the list goes on and on. But music for us is where all these cultures are in confluence, right? We have music and dance that have deep African roots. For example, we have ones that have a lot of like Spanish roots as well. But bomba is one of the most nationally connected dances that we have.
And then from that we go to, of course, salsa and reggaeton and pop and so on. On another chapter, we talk about what people wear in festivals. So I show you the Gigante that was on the parade. But we especially pay attention to the Santiago Apostol Festival, which happens in the town of Loíza. And Loíza is very close to San Juan, and it's a place where most of the people that live are black, are descendants of people that were brought to Puerto Rico as enslaved Africans. And so this is a celebration of that little saint, Santiago, and is one of the best known events in Puerto Rico. And it plays several functions. It's very religious. The Catholic Church is very into this festival, but it's also a very important economic aspect to it, because it brings a lot of money and commerce to the city. And then, where did it go? I was still. And then this, because I really like to talk about this, is perhaps the most Spanish Catholic event in Puerto Rico, but also the one that has more pagan elements. And the Catholic Church sometimes tries to tone down a little bit of the pagan elements, but they know that they will lose the people in the town if they don't allow that hybridity that you were talking about in your class today. So this is in this chapter we discuss Afro-Puerto Rican identity, and I had shown you this image before, and so these are the Vejigantes, which are
mischievous
tricksters type of thing, little demons, but in a good way. And what they wear is mostly connected to African traditions and African masks. And then these are the caballeros, the Spanish people. Most of the people participating in the parade are black, so that is a black person wearing a mask to represent a white European person. And there's this sort of like friendly fight between the two of them. And there's other characters that appear. This is La Mula, or the mule, and then this is El Carretón Alegre, and maybe you can tell them about it.
Yes, the happy cart. It plays music, essentially, so it just brings a lot of joy to the parade. And as you can see, that person is carrying a little bit of what looks like a very rudimentary broom to clean the path for the saint to follow. But as you can see, I don't know if you can see it from here, but it is a person, it's a man wearing drag, and it's a black person wearing blackface. So it is quite a scene. But
accentuating the connections then of this particular part of the festival to African traditions. And yes, I guess the only way they can get away with it is because, again, it's blackface on a black person's face. It's a very interesting approach to the festival. We also have a chapter where we talk about Taino Nation, which is the movement to recover indigenous identities. We see a lot of that happening, of course, in many other parts of the world, but this particularly, the interest in Taino culture was revived in the 60s and 70s, and it was mostly because it was believed that there were no indigenous people left in Puerto Rico, that they all had been killed during the Spanish colonization, or they had died of diseases and so on. So the main goal here was to establish a presence, and what we study specifically is how people use Taino indigenous symbols in tattoos and in t-shirts, and we analyzed social media to talk about how people kind of like claim that indigenous identity, regardless of whether they have any indigenous DNA in them or not. They see it as a way to claim their identity, and we saw that also in the parade.
So the other symbol that I wanted to talk to you about was the jibaro. And we already mentioned this person before, but the jibaro is the peasant, and it is a mountain peasant. And as a national symbol, it has not been static. It has changed and evolved throughout time, but very romanticized. The traditional jibaro, the actual jibaros, were actually very poor. As you can see how they dress here, very functionally, rarely wore shoes. It made it to art. It made it to literature. It really brought in, Puerto Rican identity since the 1800s for literature and painting. And it made it all the way to the present times when we have here Bad Bunny wearing a pava hat, the jibaro hat, for a photo shoot with Vanity Fair. So that is a whole trajectory of a national symbol from the poverty to the riches.
So now, back to the parade, as we said. So we were amused and entertained, but above all, we were like really happy to see that everything we had written about was actually present in the parade. And as we said, we believe that the meaning of Puerto Rican fashion and identity should be ambiguous, should be free, should be fluid, and include both what the diaspora and the people in the island wear.
So again, what better place than Puerto Rico to explore how this fluidity and to an extent ambiguity questions the notion that objects of dress have an essential meaning.
So we had talked about that before, and I told you to remember that. So we think that in the hands of the diaspora, they have actually furthered the effectiveness of using the way you look as a political tool. And then again, as Raúl said, we think that this then makes Puerto Rico, both the island and the diaspora, a perfect place to analyze national identity.
Yep. So
I think we need to skip.
yes,
to
that's
here.
right. Yes.
Yeah.
So
So we think, and we're going to read a little bit now, we think that the Puerto Rican diaspora offers a clear example, it's difficult to concentrate with that, of the practice of decoloniality. And so we're going to talk a little bit about theory now, and as Raúl says, buckle up. So decoloniality, of course, is about removing elements of the colonial power from the culture of the place. So in this case, removing Spanish American elements of culture from Puerto Rican culture. But we see here in the parade coloniality as a lived experience, and particularly by those that are engaged in a struggle for survival as both colonized and racialized people, and they look to fashion and dress to keep their culture alive.
Yep. So we believe that the celebration of the full spectrum of Puerto Rican national identity on display at the National Puerto Rican Day Parade is not merely a celebration, but an effort to assert a Puerto Rican presence right at the center of the U.S. capitalist/colonizer universe, New York City.
So more than a parade, we also see this. We also see this in a way as a political parade, as a political manifestation of the presence of Puerto Ricans in the U.S. So dressed in a variety of Puerto Rican elements of material culture, then the diaspora and those who come from the archipelago make their existence more than visible in front of the eyes of people that are displeased when they see a celebration of non-white culture in the United States. And we experienced this in Chicago, for example, for September 15 and 16, when Mexican Independence Day was celebrated in Chicago. It was like a really big parade, and it was kind of crazy. But when you see, for example, a similar celebration for St. Patrick's Day, people do not protest as much. So when people that are not white have these festivals, we believe then it becomes more about expressing your otherness and about claiming your right to be part of the country.
Yep. So this is, as we see it, decoloniality as lived experience manifested in the way we dress and fashion ourselves.
As we were finishing this book, the publisher sent it for review to other professors to read it, and they said that they wanted us to give them more about what the literature, the theory on decoloniality said. And we did a little bit of that, but we also understood that as researchers and privileged academics, we were kind of concerned with the idea of promoting decoloniality only as a theory and as an intellectual exercise. We were concerned with the idea that there was a canon or a series of steps that you should follow to approach decoloniality. And we thought that that was contradictory, since decoloniality is about giving back power to the people. Then we were seeing the academics kind of like deciding what was decoloniality and what wasn't.
Yeah, particularly for us that, we are witnessing people practice their life, right? These are not our practices. So, this whole thing is, I'm gonna go here, is of particular importance because it implies centering theory and academic responses over the way people, such as the Puerto Rican and their dress and fashion practices, live their life, embodied, lived experiences, right? So this is how they live their lives. So, if we were to just fully define these experiences through theory, then who are we benefiting?
But then we were also started thinking about the difference between decoloniality and decolonization, because decoloniality, of course, is about theory, it's about culture specifically, but decolonization.
Decolonization is actually a political process, right, where we become independent, and Puerto Rico being a colony, what are we going to do?
So we talk about decoloniality at the end of our book, and we talk about the idea of how it would be very difficult to extract anything that came from Spain, from Puerto Rican culture. Because, for example, the Festival de Máscaras that we were talking about earlier that happens in the town next to Raúl, this is easily traced to the Canary Islands in Spain. And it is also associated with the Catholic calendar. It's a festival. It's a Lent festival. It happens in Christmas, very early in the season of carnivals. But if you remember, of course, carnivals are right before the Lent season. So what happens if we remove the connection to Catholicism, the connection to Spain from this festival or the other festival that I told you about that are so important for people in Puerto Rico?
Yeah. So we question: are there any Puerto Rican traditions that are fully free of colonial impact?
And we think about this, for example, with the people that have embraced the Taíno imagery. So these are a family that I photographed without their permission during the parade, and they were all wearing these T-shirts, as you see, that have the Taíno native symbols, right? So the people are looking at what Puerto Rican identity is from different points of view. For them, that was the most important thing, to embrace the indigenous native identity.
Right. So, fashion, as we've said, and dress are used to mark a sense of belonging, just like this family, to a community or a nation. As material culture, dress, just like costumes and in some cases fashion, can be a significant visual mark of ethnic identity for Puerto Ricans.
So we also wanted to really quick mention, this is another chapter that we talk about, but we're not going to tell you a lot, but these are the Young Lords, and if you're familiar with the Black Panthers, the Young Lords were sort of like the Puerto Rican version of the Black Panthers, and they actually worked together, and they had their own fair share of parades, and the Young Lords were actually talking about ideas of decolonization and decoloniality in the 1970s before they became popular in academia. And then we also wanted to show you a little bit of what Puerto Rican fashion designers are doing that is connected to some of our research. So I'll tell you about the one in the middle, and then Raúl can tell you about the other ones. But this is the national flower, the Flor de Maga, and this appears in a lot of the fashion designs by Puerto Rican fashion designers. So they're bringing their identity and their culture into that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of colonial elements to unpack here on this design. So to the one on the left is a recent design from last year. It was a commission design to celebrate the 500 years of the city of San Juan. And this one is based on the Spanish ballroom, the structure that is in San Juan, and the chandelier in the middle. So the designer, Héctor Omar, one of the people we interviewed for our book, he came up with this design where it repurposes the concept of the ballroom and applies it to current ballroom culture, particularly as it relates to trans communities. And then on the far right there, we have one where two faces. That's Julia de Burgos, a very important poet in Puerto Rico, that he was also an island poet and a diaspora poet. And as you can see, there are two faces there joined by the Statue of Liberty. So, there's a lot of play and connections with colonial.
The other place in which we analyze the idea of how do you define the national identity of a country, and it's probably one of our favorite chapters, is we do an analysis of what the Miss Universe, the Puerto Rican contestants wear to the Miss Universe contest for the national costume dress. So this one, for example, is supposed to be an homage to the Taíno natives, and you can see a little bit of that, but obviously, they didn't wear anything that looked like this. This is much more related to carnival customs and so on. So it talks about indigenous people, but not necessarily in the right way.
And then we have Ave Gigante with Swarovski crystals. Nothing, nothing to do really with what we saw earlier. And we have African influences.
which is the cover of our book. So what we argue in this chapter is that if you look at just one of these customs, you cannot get a full idea of what Puerto Rico is. But if you look at all the customs that the Miss Universe contestants have worn through the years, then you get an idea of what Puerto Rican national identity may be.
All right, back to the parade.
Back to the parade, and then to the last
Yeah.
things we have to say.
So, there are large conversations about how Puerto Rican identity is preserved and expressed through material culture. They have been conducted for centuries and will continue their ebb and flow. But yet there is perhaps a je ne sais quoi or a no sé qué, right? That every Puerto Rican perceives and experiences as defining their identity.
So just like with the Miss Universe contest, there is this, arguments of what can represent or what cannot represent the country. But we think that these conversations and the disagreements are actually essential to figure out what role costume and dress and fashion can play in shaping and perhaps reshaping Puerto Rican identity. So we think of dress and costume and fashion as expressions of national and cultural and even as individual identity, and we think that they should remain fluid, that we should not try to decide this is what being Puerto Rican is, but that when you're trying to decide what being Puerto Rican is, you need to look at everything that we just told you and even more. And that's it for now. It was 45 minutes, more or less.
Thank you.
I'll ask one. So you kind of talked about the Hebrew a little bit. You talked about the Hebrew a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of jobs were they like working, and like, what do they kind of like base their life on?
Farming. Yeah, it was farming. They would probably coffee plantations, plantain, etc. Always. No, not sugar, not sugar. So they start in the mountains, and then later on, they do migrate to the coast for sugar, and so they lived off the land, and they might work for like an hacendado that would have lent a little piece of land for them to work in, that's it. So they really didn't. That's all they did, just work the land, essentially. And so they were normally of Spanish descent. So they're presumed to be mostly, lighter skin, and the Africans, the enslaved Africans, were typically working the sugar cane in the coast.
And the Jíbaro, the idea of the peasant, that appears all over Latin America and Cuba. They're called guajiros. And, if you think about Chile, and then many other places of the world, of Latin America, you will see this peasant, but they're very much of European descent. It's a white peasant. And very often they were chosen as the symbol of the nation when the countries in Latin America became independent, because that still sort of like connected with Europe. And so people that built the early nations thought, well, it's better to have this image of the noble peasant instead of like choosing the native indigenous elements to define the countries, if that makes sense. Did we answer your question?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Anything else? Yes.
You mentioned that the frog was one of the most important national symbols. I'm wondering why.
The frog? Yeah. Oh, yeah, the coquí. So the coquí, it was understood, but first it's everywhere, and it has a very distinctive sound that sounds like the name coquí. So it's inescapable. And so it's cute, and people think that, we grow up with the understanding that the coquí frog cannot live anywhere outside of Puerto Rico, which later we found out is not true, because it thrived in Hawaii, and they hate it in Hawaii. Like, they are trying to eradicate it in Hawaii. So we... The Virgin Islands, too. Yes, yeah. So people, we grew up thinking that we love it, and so it's everywhere. It's in the city, it's in the countryside, it's everywhere.
Which has been also used as a metaphor to say that Puerto Ricans can survive anywhere. So, if the coquí frog could move to other parts of the world and survive, then technically a lot of people see it as that means
Yeah.
that you're not bound to Puerto Rico. You can survive.
Yeah, which also brings us back to the Jibaro, which is seen as a symbol of resilience, so and hard work, and that's something that people like to connect with.
There is for the last Bad Bunny album, he produced a video that is very nice, and it talks about Puerto Rican identity. And it uses a frog, not this frog. It uses the other frog.
There's another frog that is not as pretty. It's actually like big and warty and but it's like it's also an autochthonous frog, and it's almost extinct now. So that brought some romanticism to that amphibian as well. So
Has anyone seen that movie?
it's a short film.
It's a short film. It's like 10 minutes, and look it up because it talks about gentrification in Puerto Rico, and it talks about how much Puerto Rico, the island, has changed. And his new album, is all about that. It's about Puerto Rican identity.
Yep. Yes.
You guys talked a lot about like the Miss Universe stuff and like the parade stuff. Is there anything you can pull from like streetwear, I guess, or daily wear in Puerto Rico?
Yeah, we can. That's interesting because Puerto Rico has consistently participated in the Western fashion styles. So when you look at Puerto Ricans, you would expect the things that you would expect to see in the U.S. Typically, you see them in Puerto Rico as well. There are some changes because we have to respond to the fact that it's perpetual summer in there, that is really hot. So there are some things that we will not wear a puffer jacket, right? Or things like that. But generally speaking, the styles are very similar. Since the 90s, I think it has favored more like urban flavors than other styles. So you see a lot of urban influences there. But for example, some practices that you see here now became very popular in Puerto Rico in the 90s when, for example, men started to plug their eyebrows and groom their eyebrows. That was like unheard of in other places. But in the 90s, that's where it kind of like started. And now I see it everywhere. So, there are some grooming practices for men, like we will get a haircut once a week or something like that, just to keep everything very sharp and tidy.
But also those, like, the Taíno symbols are part of streetwear. Like you see, like you
Yeah.
go to a store and then you will have a baseball hat with one of the indigenous symbols, or hoodies, or T-shirts, and like sports jerseys, but with a Taíno symbol. And there was
The flag too. The flag is a big part of it's always, very often you always see it in clothing, day to day.
Yeah, in streetwear. And then we can talk about this forever. But there's, sneakers. There's a lot of designs of tennis shoes that Nike has produced a few in collaboration with Puerto Rican designers, and then they would have, like, in the sole of the shoe, it would have something about Puerto Rico. And there was a fantastic one where it's a Nike shoe is designed with plantains, which are, of course, essential to Puerto Rican food. I tried to get those shoes, and they were so popular, and now they're like a collector's item. But there is footwear, like sneakers, are so important for Puerto Ricans there and here, that I think that's when you see more collaborations, perhaps, with the fashion industry.
Yep.
I hope we answer what you want. Okay. All right. Yes.
So you mentioned the Vanity Fair shoot that when we did in the Prada hat. So what was kind of the general reaction to that? Was it like seen as almost like appropriating? Because he's a rich star. Was it like celebrated?
No, not at all. It was quite celebrated because he lives in Puerto Rico still. So he's very much, his albums are in Spanish. He speaks English very, with some difficulty, some challenge, and he continues to. His commitment is to continue producing music in Spanish, right? So no, it was like actually quite celebrated. This one here, for instance, this photo was taken in Jayuya, which is a very rural mountain town, and it's where there's a lot of like traditional music takes place, and that like him performing at a very famous place in Jayuya. So you know, no, he was well celebrated.
I mean, he's moved a little bit on the last album from the trap, reggaeton type of music to incorporate more like there's bomba and plena, everything that we mentioned in his most recent album, and then he performed in New York. And
For SNL.
Yeah, but also at the woman's famous place. There's a woman, Puerto Rican woman that has forgot her name, but she has this.
Brooklyn,
And it's in Queens, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, where it's kind of like a traditional Puerto Rican salsa place, and she appears in one of Bad Bunny's videos, and he performed there. It's a tiny place that we wanted to go. Now it's impossible to go. Toñita.
Yeah.
It's impossible to go because he made her super popular, and so he's really promoting, I would say, almost everything that we talk about in here. And he's been also a defender of, gender identity and a couple of other things. He has a whole song that is about when a trans person was killed. So.
Yeah. So he's working that hat. He's pulling that look. He is working. We all at some point in life wore that hat for school, for a dance or something. Everyone had at some point like a child version of that hat. So no one in real life, day to day, wears the hat. Like even a farmer wouldn't necessarily have anything like this anymore. It's really it's a costume now, right?
But that one is a fancy. That's a fancy pava hat.
The one here,
the one of the Vanity Fair
Fair
style.
one, yeah, that's like.
It's really beautiful, and there's another photo from this photo shoot where he has a lot of the straw, like his whole suit is embroidered, I would say, with straws.
Yeah.
These were awesome questions. Thank you.
Thank you.